The sun dipped low over Suleiman village, painting the sky with gold and orange. Elderly business tycoon Jabari Ndlovu sat in the wide courtyard of his grand estate, surrounded by family who had come from far and wide for a rare reunion. The air was rich with the smell of roasted meat and sweet maize. Drummers played rhythms that made children dance and elders smile. Laughter rose and fell like music of its own, weaving through the evening. But as Jabari watched the faces around him, his smile never reached his eyes. Something felt off. The cheer was loud, yet there was a thin, cold thread beneath it, something only he seemed to notice. His eldest son's laugh was too forced, his cousin's glances too quick and secretive. Even in the warm glow of the fire, Jabari felt a shadow stretching across the celebration. He took a slow sip of his drink, letting his gaze travel from group to group, searching for the source of the unease. Children darted past him, playing tag, their feet kicking up dust. Women clapped to the beat of the drums. Men traded jokes by the fire. On the surface, it was joy. But Jabari's years in business had taught him to read people's eyes, and some eyes here tonight told a story they didn't dare speak aloud. He shifted in his seat, pretending to relax, yet every sense was alert. Something was brewing in his own family, and he would need to be ready when it came. Jabari was watching the dancers spin and clap when he felt a tiny hand tug at his sleeve. He looked down and saw Cabello, his 9-year-old grandson, standing there with wide, frightened eyes. The boy's lips trembled as he leaned in close, so close Jabari could feel the quick, shaky breath against his ear. "Grandpa," Cabello whispered, his voice so soft it was almost lost under the sound of drums and singing. "They're going to take your money, and send you away." Jabari froze. The music still played, people still laughed, but the words seemed to slice right through the noise. He stared at the boy, unsure if he had heard correctly. "What did you say?" he asked quietly. Cabello didn't answer right away. His eyes flicked nervously toward the far side of the courtyard, where Jabari's eldest son stood with 2 other relatives. They were talking in low voices, their faces calm but their eyes sharp, scanning the crowd like hunters. Cabello's small hand tightened around Jabari's arm. "I heard them," the boy said, his voice trembling. "They were talking in the kitchen. They said you are too old now. They said they have a paper from a doctor that says you can't make decisions anymore. They want to take everything. And then, they said they'll send you to a place far away." Jabari's heart pounded, but he kept his face still. If anyone was watching, they would see only a grandfather listening to his grandson. He gave Cabello a slow nod, the kind that told the boy he believed him. Inside, though, his mind was racing. He had built his empire brick by brick, deal by deal, over decades. Every coin, every piece of land, every connection had cost him years of work. And now, the people he had raised, fed, and trusted were plotting to steal it all. "Did anyone see you talking to me?" Jabari asked softly. Cabello shook his head. "Good," Jabari said, forcing a smile to calm the boy. "Go play now. Stay away from them. And don't tell anyone else what you told me. Do you understand?" Cabello nodded quickly, his little chest rising and falling fast, and then slipped away into the crowd of children. Jabari sat back in his chair, his eyes fixed on the 3 men across the courtyard. They were laughing now, but it was the kind of laugh that never reached the eyes. He could see it clearly, their hands moving in subtle gestures, leaning in close as they spoke. Words like "doctor's note" and "transfer" suddenly fit into place, and his stomach tightened. They were patient, careful, waiting for the right moment. He let out a slow breath and reached for his drink, lifting it to his lips like nothing in the world was wrong. But his thoughts were no longer on the music or the dancing. Cabello's whisper had opened a door he could never close again. If they thought they could outsmart him, they were wrong. They had just given him the most valuable gift, a warning. And Jabari Ndlovu never wasted a warning. Jabari leaned back in his chair, pretending to enjoy the celebration, but every sense in his body was awake and sharp. The laughter around him sounded real to others, but to him it had a hollow ring. He kept his face calm, nodding when someone passed by, smiling when relatives greeted him, but his eyes were always moving. He watched how certain people stood together too often, how their heads bent low when they spoke, how their eyes darted toward him and then quickly away. He knew these signs. He had seen them in boardrooms, in business deals, in the sly movements of people who wanted something that wasn't theirs. The drums played louder now, giving him cover to move around the courtyard without drawing much attention. He walked slowly, greeting aunts and uncles, patting children's heads, always keeping his ears open. Near the side of the house, close to the kitchen door, he caught the sound of hushed voices. He turned his head slightly, pretending to admire the flowers, but his focus was on the words that slipped out between the bursts of laughter. Doctor's note. Incapacitated. Transfer papers. Each word landed like a blow to his chest, but he kept his breathing steady. They were not just planning to take his money. They wanted to take his name, his decisions, his dignity. They wanted the world to believe he could no longer think for himself, that he was too old and too weak to run his empire. And once the papers were signed, they would control everything, the businesses, the land, the bank accounts. Everything he had built would be in their hands. He stepped away before they could notice him, forcing a warm smile as a cousin called out to him from across the yard. He laughed at her joke, though he barely heard it. In his mind, pieces were falling into place. Cabello's warning had been true. The men who should have been protecting him were sharpening their knives in the shadows. Jabari moved to a quieter corner, under the shade of an old fig tree, and watched them from a distance. The eldest son, tall and confident, seemed to be the center of their small circle. He leaned in when he spoke, his hands making small, sharp gestures, the others nodding along. Every so often, one of them would glance at Jabari, quick and sly, then look away like nothing had happened. He sipped his drink slowly, giving no sign that he had heard anything unusual. In his head, though, he was already making a list. These men thought they could corner him like some old lion who had lost his teeth. But Jabari Ndlovu still had claws, and he knew how to use them. They were smiling now, believing their plan was invisible, but he could see it as clearly as the sun setting over Zulumand. If they wanted a game, he would give them one, but it would be on his terms. They would not see the trap until it closed around them, and by then, it would be far too late. The night in Zulumand was quiet, the kind of deep silence that only came after the drums stopped and the last laughter faded into sleep. The estate lay under a silver moon, its shadows stretching long across the courtyard. Jabari could not sleep. Cabello's warning and the whispers he had overheard kept turning in his mind like a restless wind. He decided to walk to his study, needing the comfort of his books and the heavy safe in the corner that had guarded his most important papers for decades. When he reached the study door, his heart sank. The lock hung twisted and broken, the wood around it splintered. He stepped inside, his bare feet silent on the rug. The smell of disturbed air hit him first, a faint scent of metal and dust. His eyes moved to the safe. Its heavy door was open, the steel shining in the moonlight. For a moment, he could not breathe. He knelt, reaching inside, and his fingers met nothing but empty shelves, except for one thick envelope lying neatly on top. Jabari opened it, his hand steady though his blood boiled. It was his will, or at least it looked like it. But as his eyes scanned the words, the truth burned into him. This was not his will. This was a trap. The names on the document had changed. The properties, the businesses, the bank accounts, all were now written to go to his eldest son and 2 other relatives. Every other beneficiary, every charity, every loyal friend had been erased. He closed his eyes for a second, letting the rage surge through him like fire. They had done it. They had stepped into his most private space, touched his most guarded possession, and tried to rewrite his life as if he were already dead. In that moment, Jabari wanted to storm into their rooms, tear the paper in their faces, and throw them out of his house. But he knew better. One wrong move, one burst of anger, and they would twist it into proof that he was unstable, exactly what they needed to declare him unfit. So he folded the forged will carefully and slid it back into the safe, leaving it exactly as he had found it. He stood still for a moment, his eyes sweeping the room. A few papers were out of place, a chair slightly moved, the faint scuff of shoes on the wooden floor. Every detail told him this had been planned for days, maybe weeks. They must have thought he was too old to notice. Jabari walked out of the study and closed the broken door behind him, his face calm, his steps measured. But inside, his mind was already moving faster than it had in years. They thought they had stolen the future from him. What they didn't know was that they had just given him the weapon he needed. He would not only protect his empire, he would make sure they regretted ever trying to take it. And when his move came, it would be quiet, sudden, and final. The morning sun rose over Zul'Aman, warm and golden, but inside Jabari's chest the night's cold anger still burned. He moved through the house with slow, steady steps, greeting family members as if nothing was wrong. His enemies smiled at him, thinking they were still unseen, and he smiled back, hiding the storm in his eyes. Over breakfast, with everyone gathered, Jabari cleared his throat and spoke in a voice calm but full of weight. "Tonight," he said, "we will have a special moment at the evening feast. I will reveal my final inheritance plans to all of you." There was a stir of excitement, and he could see the glances passing between his eldest son and the others. They believed their plan had worked. That was exactly what he wanted. After breakfast, Jabari went to his study, now guarded by a locked inner door. From there he made 3 important phone calls. The first was to his longtime lawyer, a man who had been by his side for over 30 years. "Come to the feast tonight," Jabari told him. "Bring the real will and all the papers we discussed years ago. I think it's time to use them." The second call was to the local police station. He asked for 2 trusted officers, men who knew him well. "You'll see why when you arrive," he said. The third call was to a respected journalist whose stories had shaken the whole district before. "I want you here tonight," Jabari said. "And I want your camera ready." By midday, the house was buzzing with preparations for the evening feast. Goats were being roasted, women chopped vegetables, and children ran in and out with trays of fruit. Jabari sat quietly in the courtyard, watching it all, his mind ticking like a clock. Every move he made was measured. He chatted with guests, tasted the food, and played the role of the cheerful elder. But in his thoughts, he was building the moment step by step, knowing that one slip could ruin everything. As the sun began to set, his guests arrived, dressed in bright colors and wide smiles. The air filled with the smell of grilled meat and the sound of drums once again. Jabari's lawyer slipped into the courtyard quietly, followed by the 2 police officers in plain clothes and the journalist carrying her camera bag. Jabari greeted them warmly but without fuss, so no one would suspect their true purpose. His eldest son and the 2 other plotters were glowing with confidence. They believed that tonight was their victory, the night the family would hear that new will read out loud. They didn't notice the careful glances the police officers exchanged, or the way the journalist's camera lens caught the light as she tested it. Jabari looked around at the full courtyard, the faces lit by firelight, the smell of celebration thick in the air. His heart was calm now. Tonight, the hunters would become the hunted, and the truth would break open in front of everyone. And when it did, there would be no place for them to hide. The feast was in full swing. The courtyard glowed under strings of lanterns, and the fire pit sent up waves of heat that carried the smell of roasted goat across the night air. Laughter mixed with the rhythm of drums, and glasses clinked as relatives toasted to health and long life. Jabari sat at the head of the long table, dressed in a dark suit with a gold pin on his chest. His face was calm, almost cheerful, but his eyes carried a quiet fire. The 3 men at the center of his suspicion, his eldest son and 2 other relatives, sat close together, their smiles wide, their voices loud. They thought this was the night they would win. When the plates were cleared, Jabari stood slowly, and the courtyard quieted. "My family," he began, his voice carrying easily over the crowd, "tonight is special. I have decided to share my final inheritance plans, so there is no confusion in the future. But before I read the will, I want the three of you," he gestured toward the plotters, "to bless these papers for the good of the family." There was a ripple of surprise, but the three men stood, eager to play along. They stepped forward, their hands touching the papers on the table. As they did, Jabari gave a small nod toward the journalist in the corner. Suddenly, the courtyard went dark except for the glow of a large screen that flickered to life. Gasps rose as everyone saw the grainy black and white image from inside Jabari's study. On the screen, the three men appeared one by one. They broke the lock, opened the safe, and pulled out the original will. The eldest son slipped it into a folder while the others replaced it with a forged copy. Every movement, every whisper was caught on camera. The footage ended with them leaving the study, looking over their shoulders. For a moment, there was only silence, thick, heavy, and sharp. Then the shouting began. Women covered their mouths in shock, uncles rose from their seats demanding answers, and children stared wide-eyed at the screen. The three men froze, their earlier confidence melting into panic. The police officers, who had been sitting quietly among the guests, stood up and moved forward. Jabari didn't shout. He simply looked at them, his voice calm but carrying the weight of the whole room. "You came into my house. You broke into my study. You tried to erase the truth of my life. And you thought I would not see." The eldest son tried to speak, but the officers were already at their sides, pulling them away from the table. The crowd's voices rose like a storm, some crying, some cursing, all staring at the men who had been exposed in front of the whole family. Jabari sat back down slowly, his hands resting on the table. Around him, the truth had exploded like a firework, lighting up every hidden corner. The trap had closed, and the hunters had been caught in their own game. The courtyard was still buzzing from the shock when the police led the three men away in handcuffs. Some family members shouted at them, others turned their faces away in shame. The night's celebration had turned into a moment no one would ever forget. Jabari remained seated at the head of the table, his gaze steady as he watched the betrayal leave his home. When the noise settled, he stood and looked around at every face in the crowd. His voice was calm but strong. "Tonight, you have all seen the truth. These hands will not pass my life's work to greed or dishonor." He paused, letting his words sink in. "I built this empire for the good of our people. And from this day, it will serve them directly. I am creating a trust, one that will build hospitals, schools, and help small businesses grow here in Zulumand. Every coin will stay in this soil and feed the hands that work it." The crowd murmured, some clapping softly, others nodding with pride. Then Jabari turned to where Cabello stood shyly near his grandmother, his small hands clasped in front of him. "And when the time comes," Jabari said, smiling warmly, "the trust will be guided by Cabello." Gasps rippled through the gathering, followed by applause. Cabello's eyes widened, but Jabari could see the same courage in them that had brought him the warning in the first place. The boy stepped forward, and Jabari placed a hand on his shoulder. "Your whisper saved an empire," he said quietly. Under the glow of the lanterns, the family cheered. It was no longer just a feast, it was the night a legacy changed course, carried forward not by greed, but by a child's honesty and a man's unbroken will.